Hello and welcome to a new season of the In-Depth Violin Guide. So, for this first episode of our newest season, we'll be looking back at the left hand and how it relates to our intonation. So, let's get to it. So with regards to building good intonation with our left hand, we must understand that our hands don't have ears. Okay, so what does this mean? It means that your hands will mainly rely on two things. Number one is their position with regards to your fingers and hands in relation to the neck of your instrument, and of course your ears. So your hands are sort of blind people when it comes to finding the correct tone or tune of a certain note. For example, when we want to play a scale, our hands will naturally lay on the position that we know is correct. Okay. This goes to show that you need a lot of training for your hands to orient itself to go to a certain position that it needs to be in order to locate the correct position. Okay. Let's try to play it out of tune. Okay. If you look at your hands, now I'm exaggerating here. If you look at your fingers and your hands when you try to play it out of tune, you can sort of guess that it would be out of tune just by looking at them. Because we've established this sort of framing on our previous episode or the previous season about how your fingers should actually look. So, we're not only just talking about hearing and the position or touching the position, we should also look at how they look or visually see that we are playing in tune. So this is a good checklist to remember when you're trying to play and checking your intonation, is that it should sound well, it should feel well, and it should also look well. Okay. So if we try to play it in the proper position, finger position, we have, as you can see, my first finger is framed, right? The three-sided square. And then, since it's sharp, you have this extension from this joint right here. And then, another frame, another square, and then the same thing on the. So you really need to look at it, feel it, and also hear the difference of your intonations. Okay. Aside from your hand positions, you should also feel the stretch, right? So your hands generally are placed in the position where the natural notes are also laying naturally for your fingers, right? Now, you stretch when you go sharp, usually on the string, depending on the notes that you need. So this will give you more of an idea of when is something sharp is when you extend your fingers from their base positions, okay? Which is almost like this all the time, right? So it depends on the string and of course on the notes that you need to play. When it comes to shifting, there is this feeling that we also need to understand. The distances in between your movements. Okay. Let's try it out. When I shift from first position to third position. Okay. your hand or your finger feels the distance in between. So, this is a shifting exercise that can be done. So you just try to target the third note, which is D or Re. The position here. So your hand almost measures its distance by itself, no? By the movement. So you have to check the relationships in between. Okay, not just of your finger to the fingerboard and strings, but also your thumb to the neck, of how far it needs to travel. The position of your elbows as you go in, the angle of the elbows also plays a vital role. And also the way your palm almost touches the body of the violin. So when you're shifting, there's a lot of spatial recognition that you need in order for you to land on the note that you need to, not just hearing, okay? Because if you only mainly rely on your hearing and you don't see it and don't feel it, you won't land certain notes perfectly, or not really perfectly, but accurately, if you look at them and feel them also. So you really need to see, to hear, and to feel. One factor you can use to check the framing, especially in the lower positions, to check your intonation, is the octave. Okay. When we say the octave of the frame, your first finger from whatever lower string you want to base it on. So you can base it on here, on the D string. So first finger and the fourth finger should be an octave on the next string beside it. So from D string 1 and A string 4, you could always play an octave without the need to stretch, any of your fingers. So you can check if your intonation is spot on, especially on the lower positions. Now, this won't work at higher positions, maybe until 5th position. This is 3rd. See, no stretch. Now 5th. Now, the frame doesn't change much, but if you look at my fingers, it's a bit closer. Because as we go higher up the strings, the distances in between the notes change, right? So if it's within the octave, it's going to be easier to check. Now, checking the insides. So we've checked 1 and 4. Now 2 and 3 has the most movements with regards to framing, right? So, for example, if you play chromatic scales, usually you have 4 positions for the 2 inner fingers and only 2 positions for the outer fingers or the extremes fingers. Okay, so like what I said earlier, this is the natural position, so you can keep it as, okay, this is the natural sound. Okay, now when you want to sharpen it, you just move the frame open, so you extend. So it gives you the idea that, okay, when something is sharp or when something is higher by a semitone, is you just move it or extend your fingers. Now, the extension is still based on this simple rule that one finger equates to 1 semitone. Okay? So when you're extending, you're just moving a finger ahead. See? Let me play that. So this is Do sharp or C sharp. Right? Now, aside from framing, you should also pay attention to the way your fingers are angled. Okay? So, with the proper angle of your fingers, even though it's hitting the right spot on the fingerboard. Now, the way you put them down, either by the pads or by the tips, your finger should always be accurate also. Not just the whole finger, but also the way you put it down. Okay, let me show you. Now this is C sharp again. If I move it just a bit, so I'm a bit higher, but if you look at the frame, it's already broken. Okay, now sometimes when we extend, there's a tendency for the finger to collapse. Now when the finger collapses, what happens? We're now a bit lower. So you really need to work on the position, not just exact place, but also the angle at which you push down onto the strings. There is a principle called double contact. Now, this is for checking your intonation, especially when you're shifting. Every time you shift or every time you move your hands, there should always be 2 points of contact. No more, no less. Okay. This will give you enough information, feeling-wise and visually, to know where your hand is positioned. Okay. So, with how to hold the violin, as I've showed before, you hold the violin right here and right here. Okay, on the neck. Now, this doesn't count, okay? So, we only count this part with this double contact principle. Now, when you shift, you move your whole hand. But as you move closer into the violin body, you still need to maintain the double contact. But instead of having the contact here and here, you change it depending on your position. Okay? So, when you're in the first position, your contact is here, this part, and this part. Right? Now, second, maybe third, you can still use those contacts. But there's for me, personally, there's this feeling of my hand to actually touch the base of the body. Okay. So when that happens, I need to let go of this contact right here. Because that would limit my movement and it would hinder the dexterity of my fingers. Now, some people reach third position but still doesn't hit the body of the instrument, and that's fine. So you can still stick to this contact right here, these two. Now when you try to go into the violin, we've talked about elbows, so our elbows should go in. Now the 2 points of contact will be this part of my thumb and this part of my palm. So, this is free, but if you look closely, my frame isn't changing that much, right? Now, even if I go to a higher position, the frame still stays the same. So, that's the time that you need those contacts in. Of course, this is not just a strict rule. There are some exemptions to the rules. When we try to play expressive passages, okay? For example, we want to play slow movements, like when we need a lot of vibrato in a long duration of notes but fast vibrato, we can lose some points of contact, especially this part, to give way for our vibrato. This is why sometimes you see violinists raise their first finger to give way to their vibratos, right? We will talk about vibrato in another video. But there's some sort of exemptions when it comes to that double contact principle. Of course, it's more important that you can move rather than just sticking to it aimlessly, just sticking to having that contact even though you can't move. Of course, we want it to be relaxed and sound natural. Now, when you reach higher positions, of course, you change contact. And knowing which part of your body is in contact with your instrument and knowing the position that you are in would help you identify your notes faster and also give you sort of better understanding of which notes you would hit on those certain positions. Here's also an important factor in intonation is knowing the system of intonation that you're using. Now, we are not machines built to play exactly in tune every time because, of course, we're humans and we're only using our ears. So we're training our ears as best as we can, but the system of intonations would vary. Okay? We have the tempered or the natural that we use in violin playing. We also have different intonation systems, but these are the most common. When we say tempered, this is like a piano. The piano is tempered to make sure that each semitone on the keys is equal of length of distance to each other. Okay, this is very, very, let's say, mechanical because it made it so equal. But sometimes when we play, we also use the natural system of intonation wherein there are certain intervals that might contradict those of the equal temperament. Okay, for example, thirds. This might be correct, right? But for natural, this is better. Just a little bit. So there are certain guides that may change during your playing. So I think if you're going to play and choose sets of intonation patterns or systems, you have to keep in mind if you're playing with a keyboard, for example. Of course, you should follow its intonation. And if you're playing solo, you have your own. Okay. But the number one thing you should always remember is that your ears should follow the sound correctly. So you need to really train your ears to this. Not really just say, oh, you're out of tune by how many cents, but actually understand the flow of the music that you're playing, understand how the relationships of those notes are. And of course, one great thing that I actually learned from my teacher is that all notes are actually in tune. The problem arises when you play one note going to another. Okay. So let's keep in mind that intonation is more about relationships than just hitting a number. It's not about, okay, I've hit the green on my tuner. But it's more of relating your first note to the next, and to the next one to create your music, to create a sound, an idea using notes or tones. That's the most important thing about intonation. It's not just about hitting the correct notes every time, but actually relating them to one another. Because all notes are in tune. But where you go and where you came from is where intonation changes. So to train your ears, there are, I would say, 2 to 3 steps that you need to undergo, especially with your judgment. So, first thing is you need to actually identify the parts that are out of tune. So that's one. Now, once you identify them, is number 2, understand why they went out of tune. Did you play it too high? Did you play it too low? Was there something wrong with your strings? Or was there something wrong with the way you draw your bow? And then trying to actually fix the problem. So it's happening in your mind. So you identify, you figure out, and then you solve. So that's how intonation should work. Because if you only identify that you went out of tune, okay, you knew you went out of tune, but you still continued playing, you didn't adjust, so there's no point in that, right? So you really need to keep your ears and your eyes, and of course the feeling. You have to understand those things, because as you grow in your music playing or your music making or your violin playing, you'll understand more the nuances in between, the times that you need to change on the fly, so that playing becomes easier for you. So to sum it all up, to have good intonation, you need a good sense of touch, the location, or a sort of spatial understanding of your location of the hands, okay? And also their placement on the fingerboard. Now, also a good ear, so you can train your ears, the correct frame, and also the ability to change or to make adjustments when needed be. Okay. So I end this first episode. Thank you for watching, and I hope you learned something new today that could help in your violin playing. Please do comment down below if you have any questions that we can answer, and also like this video, share it with your friends. Subscribe to my channel for more content like this, and I'll see you on the next video.